Hello, welcome to today's event for the Diverse Perspectives in Digital Media and Design 2021 Speaker Series. To paraphrase James Baldwin, nothing can be changed until it is faced. And this is certainly true of the inequities that have historically shaped the entertainment industry, both on screen and behind the scenes. This event is brought to you by UConn's Department of Digital Media and Design in partnership with UConn's Center for Judaic Studies and Contemporary Life and Global Affairs. We would like to begin today's event by acknowledging that the land on which we typically gather on here in Storrs, Connecticut, is the territory of the Mohegan, Manchatucket Pequot, Eastern Pequot, Scatuquet, Golden Hill Pagooset, Nipmuc, and Lenape peoples, who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. We thank them for their strength and resilience in protecting this land and aspire to uphold our responsibilities according to their example. Today's event will feature a conversation with our guest artists, followed by a Q&A featuring questions from the virtual audience. Please take advantage of the YouTube chat box to submit your questions, which we will try to answer during the discussion. I do want to acknowledge that we are close to sundown here in Connecticut and New York, and we will do our best to finish by sunset for Shabbat, but we may go over a bit of time, so thanks for your patience with that. I'm Heather Elliott Familaro, and I'm the Department Head for Digital Media and Design at the University of Connecticut. DMD is a young department founded in 2013, which has rapidly grown to over 350 undergraduate and graduate students and 25 full-time faculty. We have 7 undergraduate concentrations across the full digital media spectrum: film production, animation, interactivity, business, and the humanities at both the Storrs and Stamford campuses. In our department, we value and celebrate our students' diverse backgrounds, and we support their development both as individuals and as professional media creators. The Diverse Perspectives in Digital Media and Design Speaker Series is one celebration of these shared values. I'd like to introduce today's co-hosts, filmmaker and professor Tanju Ozdemir, hi Tanju, and DMD student and co-host Megan Duplessi. My wonderful colleague, Tanju Ozdemir, is a Muslim Turkish filmmaker who writes and directs films that study complexities of human relationships, dreams, memories, and contemporary experiences of life. Tanju received his MFA in Film and Media Art from Emerson College in 2017. He teaches film and video production courses in DMD, and he actively continues writing, directing, and producing his films. He recently finished production of his narrative short film Intentions, which is about the gathering of 3 Turkish couples, one settled in the United States, at a dinner table, discussing the notion of hospitality and racism within the framework of the current Syrian refugee crisis as Afro-Turks in Turkey. Welcome to you.
Thank you so much, Heather.
Thank you. And I'm also happy to introduce our student co-host, Megan Duplessi. Megan is a senior Bachelor of Arts in Digital Media and Design student focusing in film and video. She began producing video content at age 14, and by 18, she founded her own production company, Megan Digital Productions, and started freelancing. Her projects include weddings, commercials, promotional videos, event highlight videos, and other kinds of content. She's had opportunities to work in film internationally in places like Mexico, the Caribbean, and South Africa. And some of her works have been aired on broadcast networks, including CBS, WBSB, and Channel 3. She also works with a multi-million-dollar business to create all their commercials and video content. Thanks for co-hosting, Megan.
Thank you.
Well, I want to waste no more time. I'm looking forward to this conversation. Tanju, let me turn over the virtual microphone to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Heather. It's my extreme pleasure to welcome today's special guest, Shawn Snyder, as we discuss representation of religion in cinema. Let me introduce our honored guest, Shawn, to our audience. Shawn grew up in suburban South Florida after receiving his BA in religion from Harvard. He spent most of his 20s on the roads as a singer and songwriter. The last 10 years have seen a return to Shawn's long-standing passion for filmmaking, during which he completed studies at NYU's graduate film program. His first feature film, To Dust, which we will discuss today, starring Matthew Broderick and Giza Rohrig, premiered at 2018 Tribeca Film Festival, where it won the Narrative Audience Award, and Shawn received the award for Best New Narrative Director. The film was released theatrically in North America in early 2019 by Good Deed Entertainment and distributed internationally by Sony Pictures Worldwide. It went on to be nominated for Best Screenplay at 2020 Independent Spirit Awards. To Dust was a part of the IFP's 2015 Emerging Storytellers. the recipient of NYU Alfred P. Sloan's $100,000 First Feature Award, and the winner of TFI's 2016 Sloan Student Grant Jury Prize. Shawn is also a former IFP Marcy Blum Fellow and Sundance Institute Feature Film and Film to Fellow, and was one of the Filmmakers magazine's 25 New Faces of Independent Film in 2016. He is currently developing his second feature, Sannyasa, and the episodic travelogue anthology, Strip Mall Troubadour, both with longtime co-writer Jason Begay. And alongside his artistic pursuits, Shawn has always been a passionate teacher, including as an adjunct professor in the graduate film program at NYU and at multiple arts education nonprofits. Thank you so much for joining us, Shawn, today.
Oh my gosh, thank you guys for having me.
All right, so let's start off with the trailer of the film and a scene that I want to show to everyone. I want her free scene.
Can I help you?
You are a scientist?
I'm a science teacher.
I have questions.
I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to be of service to you, Rabbi.
I'm not a rabbi. My wife, she died. I fear her soul is suffering until she returns to the earth. What's to become of her body?
They use pigs. They most closely resemble people. The body is reduced to tiny bits of skin and bone.
And how long does this take?
I suppose one could bury a pig. I don't imagine that that's, kosher?
I buried a pig.
We're having office hours here. Just realized nobody knows where I am. Should have left a note. This is unscientific at best. You mean a pig more like your wife. No offense.
Will this make you better?
I hope it will.
I'm here to see Shmuel. He's a friend of mine, a business friend. Look, it's a body farm in Tennessee.
What's a body for?
We have on our hands a woman. She was buried 6 feet under back in June. What's that body gonna look like right about now?
Where did you say you were from?
His blood is on our hands.
His mud is on my carpet. What are you after, Shmuel? What is this all about?
I don't know.
What's your friend's name?
Shmuel.
Jesus loves you, Shmuel.
All right, let's watch the I Want Her Free scene.
Did you want to introduce this real quick, Tanju or Shawn, about what we're going to see?
Yeah, sure. In this scene, we are going to watch the, I think, main conflict of the whole film, the starting point of the Shmuel's journey. That's why I would like to share this scene, and then I will follow up with a question to Shawn. But of course, Shawn, if you would like to share more thoughts, I would be happy to hear that.
No, let's dive in.
What are you after, Shmuel? Huh? What is this all about?
I don't know.
What?
I don't know! Okay, I don't know! At first, maybe I thought to lose her would be too much. You know, maybe I wanted her here for as long as possible with me in this world that I am in too. But now I want one just her to be gone! Gone!
All right.
You know, there's a part of the soul called neshama. Now that remains with the remains. As long as the remains remain. And as long as it remains, it's tormented, Albert. It's tortured. I just want her gone. I want her free.
Jeez.
Thanks so much. I really love this scene because it is really the main point of Shmuel's venture out of his Orthodox rules, and in order to free her, free his wife's soul and free of torture. And Shawn, you wrote this extraordinary story with your longtime co-writer and editor of your films, Jason Begay. Can you please talk about your creative process from beginning of the idea for the film to the point of the final production script? Were there any challenges while writing and crafting the characters, religious scenes and details?
How long do we have? Let's see.
Yeah.
So the origins of the story. I lost my mom in 2008, and I come from a Reformed Jewish background, which is certainly not Hasidic. And I myself have waxed and waned sort of in terms of my own engagement with my Judaism. Always sort of trying to tease out the beauty from the blemishes and find my own individual meaning in all of that. And that was no less true when my mom passed away. And I had watched my mom mourn her mom only a few years before my mom herself passed away. And you know, being alongside my family and valuing the Jewish way of mourning, which is very, very prescribed, but also very, very life affirming. You know, it was mourning in the Jewish way and sort of reconciling my own grief. And you know, it says that, you know, you do this for 7 days, you do this for 30 days. It's wise, it's ancient. It very much understands sort of what we psychologically understand about grief, how you bring somebody back to the land of the living. Different relationships have different sort of mourning requirements as well in terms of length of time. And so the thing that never sat well with me while I sort of loved the beauty of the ethos of the mourning process was that any individual mourning process could be contained in a timeline. It's 12, 13 years later, and I still mourn my mom actively. And my grief isn't something that I ever would want to exercise. It's something that I want to embrace. And it's in the embracing of my grief that I maintain not only sort of my love of life, my relationship with my mom, my existential compass pointing in the right direction. So I've come to make friends with my grief and reconcile it. So the thought that it's something that, you know, at some point you're done with. And I don't think that Judaism fully says that either. But this idea of putting timelines and constraints on it, you know, was always interesting to me. And at the same time, you know, because Judaism marks time from the death in such a very, very concrete way, 7 days, 30 days, I wound up grafting these incredibly human, dark, morbid thoughts and questions onto that timeline. You know, at every sort of emotional check-in point or religious or spiritual check-in point, I was also wondering what my mom's body looked like. This biological entity that used to be my mom that's in the grave, 7 days on, 30 days on. And at the time, I didn't go insane with that thought as the way that Shmuel does. I did what I think most of us naturally do, which is sweep those thoughts under the rug. I don't think that in the West, we live in a very, in a culture that has a very healthy relationship with death necessarily. And Judaism is don't think about the dead, think about the living. Don't ask those questions, think about life. But our minds naturally go there. It's an insanely human thing. But if we talk about it with others, other people are like, I don't think that's a very healthy way to think about things. So we don't find an outlet for engaging that. And we all know what happens when we don't engage natural human instincts. We repress them and they come back in ways that are harder to deal with and haunting. And I realized, you know, ultimately, and it was a long process, and it was also the involvement of the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, who funds scientific projects, and sort of this possibility of like, oh, there's actually a scientific component to this as well. So the grief and the feelings all brewed for a long time, and then they came to fruition, you know, when I sort of uncracked the idea that if one were to go down the rabbit hole of these questions, there was a scientific inquiry there as well. And also that scientific inquiry in many ways mirrored a Jewish dialectic, like a Jewish way of thinking, that you ask a question and it leads to another question, and the answers are ever elusive, but it's really about the continual questions. And once there was this, trifecta of this idea of religion and spirituality and our rituals, this idea of the scientific questions, and all of those put into conversation with the very idiosyncratic personal nature of grief. And I came to believe that ultimately that grief isn't prescribed, it's idiosyncratic, and it's a specific, even if you've grieved one way in your life, the second you experience another loss, that's a different relationship. So grief is as specific as the relationship between the mourner and the person who's being mourned. So once religion and science were put into conversation with personal, emotional, idiosyncratic grief, I realized that was a conversation that I wanted to explore, and that was the beginning of the process. I also brought this, you mentioned Jason, and Jason Bege has been my longtime co-writer and collaborator. And Jason is, I say, the Albert to my Shmuel. He isn't Jewish, which was also, I'm sure we'll touch upon that later, an interesting collaborative point in terms of perspective and clarity and what needs to be communicated to a non-Jewish audience. But it allowed sort of a back and forth there. And I remember the first time I pitched the idea, I also feel like humor is another way that I cope. And I feel that humor is holy and humor is healing. And I always knew that the idea when it first occurred to me was darkly humorous. And I pitched it to Jason, and Jason is steeped in genre. We both love genre, but he's the genre nerd. And he said, this is a B horror movie as well. Like, this is a B horror movie in the spirit and vein of like Val Newton films. And so all of a sudden, in addition to these interesting things to explore, these interesting stylistic ways through which we were exploring them, which are as relevant to the theme and the emotion, and the weird, schizophrenia of grief, but also this weird mix of genres that are happening into Dust, those came into the conversation as well. And then all of a sudden there was this really unique creature in front of us.
Great, thank you so much. And I'm very sorry for your loss. And I think you have done an amazing job turning your grief into a really creative project, and turning this into a film that we can watch, and of course share your grief with our mournings as well. Thank you. And so one of our DMD students, Joe Shiro, wants to know, how do your values and religious teachings affect the media you produce? You share some of the details, but I just want to bring that question again. And how you faced adversity because of your religious affiliation? How does that serve as a driving force behind the content you are producing?
Can you ask that second one, just so I can integrate it? Yeah, how do I face it?
Yeah, how do you face adversity because of your religious affiliation, and how does that serve as a driving force behind the content you produce?
Well, to answer that question and maybe and get to the other one, being a Caucasian Jew doesn't in the film industry doesn't necessarily create the adversity that other being a member of other populations does present. So I think maybe more than anything on that front, it was the idea of getting this subject matter, not myself as identifying as Jewish, but this very, very Jewish content out into the world, and how this would find a place sort of in the marketplace was maybe the more interesting question there. In terms of my own Jewish values, as I said, my relationship with Judaism has always been evolving. It's a journey, and I kind of love that. Having a child and really makes you think what you want to bring along, and how do you connect that thread to history and your family and your traditions. So there's almost been a resurgence of Jewish life at present, but it's always gone in and out. But I've always had, those questions, and I've always wanted to play music and make movies, and I went to, I always wanted also to get a liberal arts education as an undergrad before jumping into sort of a conservatory environment. And I didn't know what I was going to study, and I was innately drawn towards the study of religion because of our cultures, our questions, our rituals. Those big themes and ideas were always things that were on my mind. And I became increasingly fascinated with this idea of of how we create meaning for ourselves, how our right to individual personalized meaning, the way we build rituals for ourselves, and the way we enter, conversations with our cultural heritage or our religions and our cultures of origins. And sometimes we're able to find synergy and a kindred conversation there, and sometimes we find opposition, and how we sort of navigate, especially in a multi-religious and often secular world. I feel, again, I said humor is holy. I feel like film is spiritual and a religious, and art is a religious endeavor. How do we do that dance between, honoring our tradition and where we came from, and also having an entirely right, the entire right as individuals to make our own meaning and discover our own meaning and write our own meaning for ourselves. So in some way or another, whether explicitly dealing with religion, as a lot of my work does, or tangentially dealing with these questions about making and finding meaning and living a meaningful life, and the way that the attempt to live a meaningful life often leads to the construction of our own idiosyncratic rituals, and the construction of a religion for ourselves. Those are the questions that are sort of often at the forefront of my mind as an artist, but only because they're also at the forefront of my mind as a human.
All right, great, thank you. And talking of humor, I would like to show another clip from your film. I think it's one of the funniest scenes in the film. And in this one, Shmuel brings a pig to Edward's house. And then let's watch this, and then let's continue our panel after watching.
The fuck? Oh, fuck, Shmuel. Shit. Who are you, Shmuel? Just go away and take your pig. Just leave, man. Oh, seriously? The landlady. Shut the fuck up. Oh, fuck. Pig, man. Oh, really? Well, where did you get this one? No, don't. Officer, I had no knowledge. This pig probably has a home, It might be some young farm girl's pig that you... Heidi misses her pig, Shmuel. Did anybody see you?
I don't think so.
Now, listen, I'm a professor and you are a rabbi. And I think that you have seriously crossed the stated boundaries of the professor-rabbi relationship.
I'm not a rabbi. I'm a shaliach tzibur.
I don't know what that is.
It's a cantor.
I don't care.
I'm a Jew, Albert.
Oh, no shit.
And I just can't. I can't.
I can't, what?
I stole the pig. It is only fair if you kill it.
What? What?
You have to kill the pig.
I am not hearing this. No. Here's what's gonna happen. You and me, we're gonna pick up this pig and we're gonna carry it into your Jew wagon, and you are gonna take it home. And then we're never gonna talk about this or about anything ever again, okay?
But
killing a pig is not gonna bring back your wife, Shmuel.
Great.
All right, I really enjoyed that scene, and I love how you kind of use the theme of humor throughout your entire film. It was something I really enjoyed. So, were there any discussions of censoring that might come off as uncomfortable humor or scenes? Because different communities have different levels of tolerance going outside the line, and I assume that you considered such points with Jason while in the genre writing the story of the film.
Yeah. Well, we're obviously, with a lot of this film, sort of on the border of blasphemy when it comes to religious blasphemy, but also, sort of taboos, sort of a humor in the land of the dead, and in the land of grief, and in the land of mourning, and how we're all very, very sensitive. And the movie is sort of supposed to walk those borders and kind of find a conversation between them and push the edge to a point of discomfort, so we can kind of like reconsider things from a different perspective. And obviously the movie is, it's a tragic, it's a drama comedy. It's a tragicomic conversation. There are moments where, we're portraying ritual in a very, very honest way, specifically the up front in the film, sort of the washing of the body that was shot in a real Jewish funeral home with real members of the Jewish Burial Society. And so we're honoring that, and then we're laughing. One of the ideas for me in terms of bringing in humor was very, very much that, again, as I said, I think that humor is holy, and I think that humor is humbling and humanizing. And I think also, especially in a movie that had Jewish content, that there's a history of Jewish humor and Jewish wit, and the way that Jewish wit deals with the darkness and things that are scary. And by shining a light with humor, you almost claim ownership over them. It's a way to sort of conquer the darkness or explore the darkness. And there's also this idea of a release valve. Some of the most profound moments that I've had at funerals, or on the way to funerals, or having just come home from a funeral, my mom's included, is when all of a sudden something gives way to laughter, whether it's a memory and whether there's that permission to laugh, and what that sort of feels, and dealing with my own grief, and also dealing with something as dark as the decay of the human body. And I am a very, very naturally squeamish person. I don't think that I could have done that without humor as a release valve on that. And I always knew in a warped sort of way that this idea had a dark humor and irony to it. I think that Jason and I, as we were writing, were constantly surprised at how much we were making each other laugh, to the point of tears. Like how much humor, how much borscht belt, Jewish humor, wordplay, taboo humor that this thing could actually contain without losing the emotionality. And in fact, for us, it made it an emotionally richer experience, because I think it was the only way that we could get through, again, staring at the darkness of what we were writing. And so obviously at that point, it's something on a page, and it's another thing as you're executing it on set. And it's another thing when you're editing it and making those decisions. And up till the end, there was constant dance with us as creators. There was constant dance with the actors, both Geza, who himself is a modern Orthodox Jew, and Matthew Broderick, in terms of what the comfort levels were. And when we got to the edit, in terms of the odd things that seemed like they were one step too far, that Jason and I had this idea that we were sort of laughing at this notion of the fact that this idea that the word Jew somehow is offensive, when all it does is just actually describe a Jewish person, and that if somebody uses the word Jew, they think they have to roll themselves back from the awkwardness of having used it, because they think that they've insulted the person. And so there was this long conversation with Matthew in the scene that we just watched about this idea of a Jew, your Jew wagon, like your station wagon outside. We thought that for Shmuel as well, in some of these cases, it was like, here's, that maybe we're having our cake and eating it too, and laughing at those moments in a satirical way, but that the people, even well-meaning people, would throw these things out that would actually engender our sympathy for Shmuel. Like you're dealing with your grief for your wife, you're stepping out of your religious enclave into the secular world, perhaps for the first time, and you have to deal with this. Like you have to deal with potential anti-Semitism, and then if anything, again, that those things, especially on the front end of the movie, would actually make Albert's arc, stronger at the point of the end, when there's these two human beings connecting. But it was very, very interesting to see, what pushed people's buttons and what didn't, and what were active debates that we were having in the editing process in good faith. In terms of there were things that got cut from the movie, and early on, there was a line where Albert called Shmuel in an earlier meeting curls. He was referencing the payas, and even though that on the page maybe seems less offensive than Jew wagon later on, it felt more offensive or harsh because they hadn't gotten to know each other yet. It felt like an insult being flung. There was also this idea of Shmuel entering a non-Jewish funeral home, and the genuine awkwardness of this man trying to deal with him, And at some point, you know, here's the full sausage factory, sort of the behind the scenes stuff. At some point, you know, there was a line where he was like, we don't know how to handle Jew corpses. And he said, and there was something, again, you know, we were wondering whether or not that engendered our sympathy for Shmuel, or a line like that went too far. And we determined, also thankfully to our producer's, you know, voice in the room, that line, that those two words next to each other, because of a lot of history, because of the history of the Holocaust and all of these things, that those words, even though it was in the moment written as an accidental blunder that the funeral home director immediately recognized and felt embarrassed for, that felt too far. So it was a constant dance. And in the end, obviously, because different people have different levels of tolerance and sort of levels of what's funny and what's not, and what, you know, where something seems to be being made fun of versus being funny itself, was an interesting line, and we didn't please everybody in the end. I feel proud that I don't think that the movie was ever making fun. There was a difference of being funny versus making fun, and I don't think we ever did anything with too much of a wink. But people saw, and I can keep going. People look at the movie and see, here's a Hasidic man and a pig, and I think that I can't put my finger on it, but I think this feels anti-Semitic. I think that this feels like there's a joke here, and actually, when you research, you know, the authenticity of the science and some of the authenticity of the religion, a lot of those weird situations that happened in the film, and those breaking of taboos, actually came from honoring the actual field of science and the actual religious specificity that created these increasingly absurd situations that felt organic to the material. But I can't speak for every audience member.
Yeah, so I imagine that people from various religious backgrounds working on the film. So how did you encourage collaboration in order to bring more perspectives to the film, and any directorial challenges, particularly with the actors of Hasidic characters, while achieving convincing performances?
Yeah, we had a lot of diversity in the cast, as much as a film that is explicitly about the Jewish community could be. You know, we tried to fill other roles with a slate of representation, while trying to be authentic to the locations and the world that we were building. You know, starting from the beginning with Jason as a co-writer being not Jewish, that's where that sort of broadening of the conversation began. And at the end of the day, you know, we're trying to make a movie, you know, with all of the specificity of this Hasidic religious Jewish man mourning, that this was a movie about the human experience of grief. And I think that, and I hope that we get to that place in the film, specifically, and I know, Tanju, I think we're going to show it later on, the scene with the security guard at the body farm, that there's this idea of like, we are all humans. We all experience grief. This is a part of the human condition, and we all are tasked with finding our own meaning with the help of our traditions and independent of our traditions. We're tasked with finding our own meaning and our own beauty and whatever it is that helps us move forward. And you know, I believed that we were writing something that was oddly specific, and that we had to honor the specificity of Jewish mourning. And also there was a huge education for me into the world of Hasidism, which is different than Reform Judaism. So there was an initial question about my right to be writing about this community. And at every stage, we were bringing in consultants and engaging with members of the community, people who were still in the community, people who had left the community. But Jason and I felt that we had something that transcended that and allowed for a conversation about the human condition through this Jewish lens, but that broadened beyond this Jewish lens. When we were looking for producers, the first producers to the table, the world delivered, you know, some sort of synchronous miracle in terms of the whole way that this movie got made. But the script was in a Science Sloan, Alfred P. Sloan Foundation scientific competition, juried competition at Tribeca, and the actress Emily Mortimer was on the jury. I woke up one morning bleary-eyed because my child was probably 7 months old at the time, to an email from Emily Mortimer. And it said that my husband, Alessandro Nivola, and I, Alessandro Nivola, also an incredible actor, they both were beginning to get into producing. And Emily said, we want to produce your movie. We have to produce your film. Neither of them are Jewish. Alessandro has Jewish ancestry. But Emily said, I lost my father. I lost my mom in 2008. She lost her father in 2009. And she said, as I was reading your script, it just struck a chord and identified with the way that I grieve for my father. So that this was a movie about grief. And so that first connection that made it possible to get it produced was a crossing the religious boundary, because somebody else identified with the experience of grief. And that is true all along the way. We were a caravan of, Alessandro lost his father in the course of our development and pre-production. We were a caravan of people who had experienced grief in various ways and all felt that this movie grieved in ways similar to the way that we individually grieved from across cultures. Early on, we were lucky enough that Geza Rohrig came onto the project. I had a dear friend and mentor, Dylan Liner, who is at Sony Pictures Classics, who was one of the early readers of the script, and they had just picked up Son of Saul, which was Geza Rohrig's debut role as an actor, for distribution. And Dylan read the script and he said, you have to meet Geza. And Geza and I connected. There's a lot of reasons why he came on to this project, but Geza himself is passionately modern Orthodox, formerly Hasidic, and a convert to Judaism. He's an adoptive grandfather, an adoptive family of his in Hungary when he was young, introduced him to the faith, and he passionately leaned into it. And yet he has waxed and waned with his relationship with the Hasidic community to the point where he left it and became modern Orthodox, but also his idea of being, someone who he's the most devout, beautiful Jew that I've met in my life, and yet he has these ideas of individuality and individualism and individual perspective. And Son of Saul was a difficult movie for a lot of people, even those within the Jewish community, in terms of the way that it handled things. To Dust clearly was the fact that Geza wanted to come onto this movie, and he felt that there was an honoring, and he saw that we were handling the movie in again that way that didn't make fun, but that was Jewish down to its DNA, Jewish in its use of humor, Jewish in its engagement with questions about the world, the way that it asked questions, the way that it answered them. And Geza was a huge collaborator when it came to the Jewish authenticity. This works, this doesn't work. And when we sculpted the script with his collaboration, I mean, we even pushed him to uncomfortable places with the most sacrilegious act happening at the end of the film, and these defenses of we've entered sort of a cinematic mythology at the end. This isn't something that we're proposing people go out and do. This is not a prescriptive film. But it was a constant dance and a constant conversation. Geza, to give him props and to show sort of what a passionate Jew he is, alongside being an ardent individual. Geza is playing Jesus in Terrence Malick's new film, and he had a lot of debate and inward looking in terms of what it meant to play that role. But he's a man who like Shmuel, loves his faith and also is constantly engaging his individual place within it and outside it. And I think that's why he connected to Shmuel. But we had Jewish advisors and consultants along the way on set. But it's true as well that Jews, and even Hasidic Jews, they are not a monolith. There are like 26, 27 plus sects of Hasidic Judaism, and they all have different engagements with the secular world or different specificity to their practice. There was this moment that was beautiful, frustrating on set from the perspective of trying to move forward, but we had Hasidic advisors who were on set consulting on how the Shabbat table should look. And Geza was like, that's not how our Shabbat table looks. That candelabra is not like the candelabra that we use. And there was an active debate. There's a joke that says if you put two Jews in a room, you have 3 opinions. And that's the beauty of Judaism. But we were trying to be completely honoring of Judaism, and also trying to walk this line between modern Hasidic culture, but not identifying with a specific sect, and playing with sort of parable, fabulistic Hasidic folklore, like a folkloric idea of the Hasidic Jew. If you think about Isaac Bashevis Singer, and you think about even Fiddler on the Roof, but not trying to get stereotypical. So it was this constant dance to create a modern folkloric Hasidic Jew that was both realistic feeling and also not saying, we are talking about the Satmar sect, we are talking about this Skver sect of Judaism. So it was a constant dance. Again, with all of these questions, and they're wonderful questions, I could keep going, but wanting to talk about Geza specifically. Geza, in terms of the universe delivering the perfect person to play this role, Geza, and you would think that this would be the first thing that we talked about after he had read the script. I had to read it in a New Yorker magazine months later, that Geza is himself a member of a Chevra Kadisha, which is a Jewish burial society. And even after his entry into the film world, to this day, he continues to wash and sit over and prepare deceased Jewish bodies, because he believes in the spirituality of that. And he brought his Chevra Kadisha on, and the Jewish Funeral Home, one of them, where he still works, and that is where we shot. And we shot with female members of the Jewish Burial Society that he himself is a part of. So we were always, again, in touch with that idea of respect and authenticity for the faith.
Yeah, that's amazing to hear, Shawn, that you had this support from Jewish, non-Jewish, Hasidic and non-Hasidic crew members and actors. And we can definitely see that energy in the film as well, that everything is coming through beautifully and authentically. So in almost all the oldest religions, holy books, the major faith tests come with losing or sacrificing the loved ones. And for instance, both in Talmud and in the Quran, Abraham, or Prophet Abraham is asked to sacrifice his son Isaac for the sake of God. And these tests are always these tests are for bringing the one closer to his or her creator, or it can end up in the wrong way, turning into him or his heretic. And in the Shmuel, Edward says, gets tested by losing his life. He ventures against all the rules of his religion, and talking to women, collaborating with the biology professor, burying a pig to scientifically measure and approximate the dismantling process of her deceased wife's body in the coffin. Just like in religious stories, despite that, Shmuel seems to be a disobedient individual against the oppressive community which he dearly loves. I believe that he converges or bridges the gap between his religion and science, and returns home more enlightened, content, and closer to his God, religion, kids, and community. That's actually my reading from the poetic scene and singing of Shmuel at the end of the film. And Shawn, so you consider yourself as a Reformed Jew, and can you please share your thoughts on Hasidic community and the film's approach towards science, and where Shmuel ends up in his test?
I don't know that I've ever quite framed it this way, but obviously a lot of the test comes from, the grand test of the film comes from losing his wife. But I think that if we're talking about Abraham and Yitzchak, he's at a risk of sacrificing his children on the altar of his grief in a way as well. And I think that one of the scenes that and it's at the exact center point of the film, the scene on the boat with the children that nears child abuse in some way, out of good intentions. These kids have been raised in the faith, and now their father, who has raised them in the faith, is questioning the faith, and they only have the faith to lean on. And now they're trying to bring him back to the faith, but he's trying to show them, here's a man learning that you can grieve as an individual, and yet he's trying to impose his new way of grieving onto his children in a way that doesn't sit with their relationship to how they're supposed to be grieving or how they're told they're supposed to be grieving. So there's a lot at stake in terms of what he's doing and what he's going through. And I do feel, again, that this is a man, and this relates to audiences and their comfort with this movie, Jewish audiences and their whole spectrum of comfort or discomfort with this film. But these stories that you're talking about from our Jewish texts, that the idea of the man who is tested, of the man who strays, of the man who has to find his way back or not find back, from the man who engages in sin and blasphemy en route to healing and reconciliation or being cast out. Like that is the stuff of and Tanju, as well, of the Old Testament being a part of the Muslim faith. Those are the origins of where this all comes from. And so the idea that a contemporary movie trying to take on that ethos of exploration in the way that in the way that the Bible, the Old Testament does, in the way that the Talmud does, in the way that our stories do, debating God, trying to have a conversation with God, being angry at God. That's the stuff of Judaism. And so if you're telling a contemporary story that's trying to speak to that, all of a sudden it could be seen as blasphemous. And sometimes I felt that our more Hasidic audiences are more, and again, folks in the Hasidic community who have seen our film, especially in the ultra Orthodox community, if they're seeing our film, they're sort of having their own individual path in the world because they shouldn't necessarily be engaging in the secular culture of watching our film. But I feel that folk, and this isn't universally true, but folks who are more religious maybe understand that in our film more than some of the Reform secular Jews that I've engaged with. And I like to say that there are Hasidic audience members who have thanked me for the film, and there are Reform audience members who have called it anti-Semitic, and everything in between, vice versa, and every which way. What was the question about the engagement with the Hasidic community on the back end of that, Tanju? I probably went too far afield.
Yeah, I just wanted to, actually, I think you answered it, but so your approach on the Hasidic community's approach on the science and how you show it in the film, and then also what you think where the Shmuel ends up in his story too.
Yeah, it's really interesting because again, I had to learn a lot about the Hasidic community. And there was a lot of question on the front end and I think I had mentioned this, my right to write this film and to make this film as a Reform Jew. If you go back a couple of generations into the old country, into Eastern Europe, that's my lineage, ultra-Orthodox Hasidic Jews. But do I have a right to talk about contemporary Jews? And as we've talked about, bringing in consultants and collaborators, trying to do that sort of authentically and respectfully. The Hasidic community, again, not being a monolith, has a whole spectrum of a willingness to engage science. Geza has a beautiful idea about this. He doesn't believe that these two things are at odds. And I don't believe that they are either. And I think the movie arrives at that place. Geza frames it, Geza is a Hungarian poet. And so everything he says is poetic. He talks about a rainbow and he says, science, they're two sides of the same coin. Science explains how a rainbow happens, but it doesn't explain why. It doesn't explain what it makes you feel when you see it. And that these two things can be in conversation. And the Hasidic community as well, I always find fascinating, is very, very willing to engage, especially because of medicine and life-saving things, and because of the importance of future generations. The Hasidic community is very willing to engage science, specifically when I think about fertility treatments and the idea of getting pregnant. So there is an active engagement, but in terms of secular education, there are facets of the Hasidic community which, and this isn't insulting the Hasidic community, this is, they proudly own this, that are in constant conflict with the secular government and the Department of Education about how much secular education needs to happen in their schools. And there's a lot of ways that we might come down on what side we believe on that, but even when there are secular education requirements, and I spoke to a Hasidic teacher who was in schools teaching Hasidic youth, that there was almost a at sometimes like a wink and a nod towards, we're doing this because it's required, but if you push back against it, that is as it should be. I remember talking to folks who had left the Hasidic community and had fallen in love with science and were pursuing degrees in science. And I remember reading articles about folks who had left the Hasidic community. And one of the things that struck me the most was this idea that this man who walked into a biology 101 class when he was 21 or 22 for the first time had never in his life, had left the Hasidic community, had never in his life heard the word molecule before. And that, I mean, that struck really, really deep. And people talk about the movie and they talk about whether or not Shmuel's naivete seems to be played to comic or dramatic effect in terms of his ability to understand this. I will say that my scientific knowledge was incredibly limited. I thought that I would Google what happens to a decomposing body. Again, back to our beginning point, we don't talk about this in our culture. I thought I would Google what happens to a body and there would be a clear-cut answer that would rob the movie of a quest or any drama. And instead I found a very, very complex and very, very young field of forensic taphonomy and forensic anthropology, and realizing that we don't know exactly how any individual body is going to compose under any individual circumstance because there are so many factors. And so I believe Shmuel's naivety, and I actually think that Shmuel is insanely smart. I think he's being given a new vocabulary and he has to take his brilliance from his own world and put it into an entirely new context. And that new context might be overwhelming for him, but he catches up very, very fast. And I don't know where that train runs out, but what do I believe in terms of a reconciliation between, at the last point, a reconciliation between religion and science? I had a gut feeling, again, this movie derived from the research, the rabbit hole of forensic taphonomy and what we do or don't know about how bodies decompose. And then again, I studied religion. I myself am Jewish. I walked into this night, with cocky confidence that was immediately, gratefully shut down, that I understood about the Hasidic community, because it's the Judaism I know, just more serious. And that couldn't be more wrong from the truth. But as you dig down the rabbit hole of, again, the contemporary ritual belief systems of the Hasidic world, but as you get into the mythology, and as you get into the Kabbalistic spiritual realm, and you get into the folklore, there was just this sense that, okay, I'm going down, and then we're doing a dance between making sure that the plot honors the authenticity between both. If we wanted to do something convenient with the plot, the religious authenticity would tell us no. And so we'd have to go in that direction, but then we'd be ping-ponged. Well, the science says this, but can we bend the science? We had scientific consultants in the same way that we had religious consultants. Can we bend the science because we really want to do this with the plot? Nope, we can't bend the science. So we have to honor the science. So we're ping-pong back and forth. And as I said, that created the most bizarre situations in the film, like a Hasidic man going down this rabbit hole and having to engage with pigs because the science uses pigs as a proxy for humans. The idea that body farms actually exist and that they might need to go on a road trip and a quest to find one. But I had this sense too, that as these things were doing a dance, that the end goal through my own research would be a merging of the two, that there would be a place where the two merged. And I was on that quest to find that merging point. And so my quest of research and the madness of all of that research and all of that learning mirrored the emotional madness and the subject matter of Shmuel's actual quest. And I think that they meet in a lot of places. I think that the idea, the specificity with which Judaism, and especially Kabbalistic Judaism, thinks about the process of decomposition, believes in a natural burial, a religion that believes in one of the most natural burials, without delay, without preservation of the body, the quickest, swiftest return to the earth. Ideally, in Israel, it happens without a box. Here sometimes it needs to happen with a box. But that there's this idea of the way in which a body spiritually engages with the earth, which is what we looked at in that scene, And one of the premises that the movie, starts off with and keeps in mind, that there is a necessary spiritual process through that natural biological process that happens. And that biological process is actually tied to perhaps how sinful one has been. There is a purification of the body. The soul suffers and suffers necessarily through that process. That the soul floats above the body and mourns its own decomposition to the earth, and that there's a part of the soul that always remains with the body until the body is dissolved. And then you think about the natural way a body returns to the earth scientifically. And then you think about all the variances and the different ways and the different timelines with which a body can return to the earth. And you think in Judaism that the timeline is based on the soul and its sin. And so all of these things started interacting in very, very literal ways. But then you rise to another level and you think about the idea of oneness, returning to the earth, returning to God, returning to oneness, this spiritual idea of matter, and that there's only a finite amount of matter in the world, and that our body is recycled into oneness, that our body turns into something else, that our body decomposes and feeds the earth, and maybe it's best serving the growth of a tree than something else. That there's a lot of spiritual conversation with that level and with Kabbalistic mystical Judaism. But then at the ultimate level, and I think that this is the one that speaks to me the most, I was grateful to find those specific ones along the way, is this idea that, again, the inquiry is similar. We ask questions and we have to answer those questions with questions and more questions and more questions. And at the end of the day, you're left with faith or awe or mystery or the unknown. And sometimes that sense of unknown terrifies us, but that sense of unknown can also humble us. That's how you find scientists who are incredibly religious and spiritual, because they find God at the end of those questions. That's the one that hits me the most. I'm fascinated by the religious and the spiritual and the ritualistic aspects, but as a human, that question that we all just have to surrender to mystery, and we all have to surrender to our own idiosyncratic way of finding meaning in the face of that mystery.
That's actually perfect timing for the next clip. One of the most beautiful scenes in the film, the Stella scene, in which Albert and Shmuel go to see the bodies at the farm at night, and they get caught by the guard Stella by starlight. So let's take a look at that scene.
Pretty high.
Yes. Yeah. We'll just, you go first. Here. Yeah. Okay, wait, now. 1, 2, 3. What's happening, Shmuel? Oh, we have to go. Shmuel, please, come down now.
You gotta be fucking kidding me.
Come down.
Easy,
Shmuel.
gentlemen.
Yes, sir.
Fuck What pray tell is this?
Sir, this is not what this looks like.
I don't know what the fuck this looks like.
I can assure you, sir, there's a
First
very
of all,
reason.
I ain't no sir.
No, of course you're not. I see that now. I'm sorry.
He hurt himself.
No, he's praying, I think. He's upset. This is not. We're decent people. There's no malice here, no ill intention. This is an act of grief, of mourning.
Mourning?
Of healing.
Healing?
Yes, his wife died.
Is she on the farm?
No. He's been having nightmares.
Nightmares.
Yes.
We just got snagged for a YouTube stream policy violation. So for the copyrighted audio music. So I'm gonna have to
Wow.
talk about that. Yeah, I don't know if we're gonna get back on. I don't know if we're running.
I'm glad that our music is copyrighted.
I know, right?
But I'm disappointed.
Now, the question is, it says we've been temporarily blocked because we detected copyrighted audio and video. Of course, they don't know we're talking to the filmmaker is the issue.
Yeah.
But
It's
that's
just
right.
a machine.
We'll keep going because we're recording this separately as well. So we can always, we'll see if it gets its temporary blocked, and we'll see if we're back online.
All right, great.
Wow.
But we'll keep talking because it's a beautiful scene, and we can refer to it without showing it.
Yeah, I wish we could see the rest of the scene because this is such a multi-layered, emotion-packed, and it's importantly interreligious moment in the film. And however, Shmuel finds that body is beautiful, and he ends up converging on the common ground through grief with a Christian woman who also lost her family members to cancer. What do you think about the power of cinema when it comes to representing religion, finding common similarities at humanistic level, and dealing with grief? Because we had some discussions about your experience at film screenings at the festivals, how people were dealing with their grief when they were watching this film too.
I mean, I might say this when there's other questions asked about other scenes, but I've always felt that this is, the sort of the emotional heart of the movie. Like that this scene is the emotional soul. Obviously, Albert, it's representative of Albert as well. Albert is, for all accounts, atheistic, not Jewish, science-minded. And this movie is, if anything, it's about having conversations. And it's about how close we can come, again, to that border. And those borderlands are often very, tricky between the sacred and the profane. Obviously, you've noticed we took the profane very literally in this movie in terms of how much cursing there is by the secular members of the cast and the story. Between tragedy and comedy, the border between genres, the border between cultures, the border between YouTube stream is back up and running.
Yes.
Yeah.
The border between science and religion, and I believe that the movie that it is, again, and I keep coming back to it, it asks more questions than it answers. But if there is one thing that the movie is religious about, it is about having conversations and the spiritual act of conversing with humility and with an open mind and with a lack of defensiveness. It's about having conversations across those boundaries and recognizing the humanity of others. And I hope that, and I think that this scene represents that more than anything else. If the movie, I don't like to make didactic films. Again, I like to have a conversation within the work itself that hopefully goes on to spark conversations. But I'm happy to be didactic about the power of conversation.
Yeah.
I think, creating the character of Stella is just this idea that, you take a man who has never left, theoretically, a 10-block radius in his life. And that's true of Hasidic members members of Hasidic communities in New York, even in the city. I remember hearing folks talk about the story of like reaching a block that they never crossed until they were 20 and decided to do it on their own. So you're talking about a man who is in this insular community who has never needed to leave it. And he's slowly inching his way outside of it in hopes of returning to it. But he goes as far from home as he's ever been. And the idea of Stella was who is, he already has a diametrically opposed foil in Albert, but who is the most, who is the polar opposite of Shmuel? A Black female, a Southern Baptist Black female in Tennessee. And that they would meet, and that there would be a converging out of shared grief and the shared human experience of grief, and also out of shared faith. And that's the goal of this movie. That tonally, as Jason and I are writing, and the Coen brothers are a huge influence in this regard. When you're dealing with something that is humorous and tragic, and the holy grail is that the thing in the movie that makes you laugh the most is also the thing in the movie that makes you feel the most. Yeah. That you're not necessarily doing a schizophrenic ping pong between those sentiments, but that it really crystallizes in that moment. And so, when she says Jesus loves you, Shmuel, or may God rest his soul, and she's imposing her own evangelical beliefs upon him, it's good for a good laugh. It's so good for a good laugh that it's the punchline of the trailer. It's what a lot of people take away. But I like to think that sentiment comes from the most sincere, emotional place in which she is blessing him in the way that she can along his road, in a way that despite referencing Jesus, is the exact thing that he needs. And not only that line, but Shmuel's response to that line. You see him at one moment roll his eyes like, she said Jesus, I guess that's funny. And then the next moment when she says, may God rest his soul, that scene ends on a shot of Shmuel feeling like he's been given permission, feeling like he's not alone. And I think that one of the things about grief, and again, having, is that we all feel alone in it. One of the beautiful things that Judaism tries to do is to create a community around you so that you don't feel alone. But what if the nature of your grief is so specific that you feel alone, even surrounded by people who are trying to make you not feel lonely? And that's the worst kind of loneliness. The kind of loneliness, not when you're in a room by yourself and not in touch with other people, but when you feel that way in a crowd, and when you feel that way in your own family or in your own community. And so that he could find connection and permission. He finds it with the widow as well, the widow from Muncie, when he's getting these breadcrumbs from people along the way. And I think that, I think that we're sending this man out into the world to interact with people, with women, with secular folks, with folks of different religious values, and with folks of non-religious values. And he's getting a lot of kindness from all or most of them. There's some exceptions in the movie that create dramatic roadblocks, but the answers are given by these folks in the outside world, and they're human answers for him. And I think that the God of our universe, again, we love I talk about the Coen brothers. I love the Coen brothers. I take so much inspiration from them, but I think that, and I thought a lot about this, like there's a kinder God in the Tadat cinematic universe than there is in the Coen brothers universe. Like he's almost being nurtured and given permission to be this hurt and to be finding his own way through it. There's a belief in Judaism that we are God, that we generate God, that God comes through our human interactions. It's Martin Buber, it's I and thou, that's where you find God the most, in the connection between human beings. And so he's going out and he's finding God. Martin Buber was Hasidic. He's finding some form of God in the world through other people. and yeah, and no more than in that scene with Stella, I think.
Yeah, I really find that scene also, I can identify with that scene too, even as a Muslim. Like, this is really like where we all meet and then share our griefs and then our thoughts together, even though we are we are members of different religions. So I think this scene is really, really great for me as well as a Muslim too. So if it is okay
that isn't to say, you know, I studied religion at Harvard, and it was a very, very pluralist, you know, pluralism was the name of the game there. And I think that obviously we run into problems when there's an all too kumbaya form of pluralism that doesn't acknowledge our differences, because if we're sort of trying to skirt around it, again, you repress some of the things that are different and you're not allowed to talk about them or converse again about them. And then that's how we get the world that we live in and have always lived in, where these conflicts are endless. So yeah, it's tricky to not, and I think that my standpoint as I talk about that and get choked up is this kumbaya version of the world. And it is, and you know, it helps to acknowledge that it isn't always always that way.
Absolutely. So Shawn, if it is okay to switch gears, let's take a couple of questions from our YouTube audience, and this one is related. BFA Films and Entertainment. Is the scene with the rose outing from the toe a manifestation of this repressed emotion or repressed grief?
Yes, I think so. I think that you know, as I talked about personally too, that we all repress these things, and if you don't get answers, you get nightmares. Like if you repress them and you don't get answers, you get nightmares. You know, in the literal sense and in the metaphoric sense, and the emotional sense. The idea of the toe came from thinking about, okay, he doesn't know what happens to the body. Most of us don't know. His religion isn't going to give him answers, so the religion doesn't know. And honestly, a lot of scientists don't know, because even the realm of forensic anthropology studies bodies buried in under criminal in criminal investigations and under criminal situations. So how a normal body, we don't know. So here's a woman that he loved, and he's obsessed with how her body might decay. And the idea of the toe, which is where it started, was like, what is the most specific and intimate part of a person's body that you might know, and you know, obviously not in a foot fetish or a sexual sense, but like something that he knows, and he and now he's going to go through the process of obsessing of every, you know, you imagine that he goes through this with every single part of his body. He says at some point, I think the number is 250 something. The Tanakh, the Bible mentions that there's this many body parts. Now I have to think about each one of them decomposing in this way, but that the one that felt odd and strange and so specific and least obvious to me, and therefore more intimate, was this idea of the toe and what would happen to it. And you know, the influences for that are as varied as Tim Burton and sort of horror genre sort of stuff. And I think that there was this fungus commercial that happened on TV that I saw when I was younger, where like they're talking about toe funguses, and this like cartoon fungus like bends the toenail back and pops out and says, "Hey guys, I'm a fungus living in this toe." And that always made me so sick. And so the influences come from the Criterion Collection, and they come from commercials from the 90s on network television. But this idea that he would obsess over the toe. So that was the starting point, that these images would come in very, very crazy ways with his imagination unleashed, fully unleashed, and that they would build upon themselves with every bit of information that he got. And one was that, you know, so I had this idea of the toe peeling open, but then turning into something beautiful, which is this idea of the film, that maybe there is beauty that we can find in this decay. So it's the most disgusting, potentially beautiful toe, tendon, muscle, skin, fleshy, bloody flower ever. I have to give props to Robert Morgan, who was the animator. Literally on the page, when I first had that inspiration, I said that the skin peels back in stop motion fashion. and I knew that I needed to find a stop motion animator. And I literally, pre-pandemic, like went searching the globe for stop motion animators, and I stumbled upon Robert Morgan's work. And he was working in this realm. He was working, you know, we obviously sort of talk with mortician's wax, which you fill holes and you recreate skin on the body. He was working with body part casts, but his work had this horror, grotesque, morbid, but melancholic and hard to pin down emotionality to it. And I said, this man, and I wrote him a letter on a wing and a prayer, an email. He lives in London, outside of London. To this day, we have never been in this, shared the same physical space. And this is pre-COVID. Our full collaboration, looking into the deep, deep, dark recesses of each other's artistic sensibility and very, very morbid souls, was all done over Skype. Who even uses Skype anymore? We didn't even know about Zoom back then. But he did this stuff in his home studio, and we collaborated for over a year before he actually executed on it. So those images are, you know, they were birthed in my mind, but they were delivered by him. And the idea too that it gets separated, and then in a further evolution of that, we see the beetle coming out of the toe. Coming out of the flower and crawling down the toe later on, is this like, okay, so he has this nightmare, and then he gets a little bit of more information from this textbook that says, and then the bugs come. And now he goes back and has this nightmare again, and he's, oh my gosh, it's getting worse. And the worse the nightmares get, the more he needs to quiet them and have an answer there. There were more nightmares that were created, and an ultimate decision was made in the edit to not fully include them, but they are available online. Robert Morgan created this beautiful sort of strung together, melancholic, short experimental film based on all of the footage, the ones we used and the ones we didn't. So if you search to dust Robert Morgan.
Great. I will definitely check them out, because I really love all these nightmares and images, especially the one his wife is in the shroud, and then he's trying to see her face every time. And he removes the veil from her face. So I think there were really like strong images.
I want to say too, because this is the film professor in me, because I know that there's film students here. One of the beautiful things about this creative process, and Jason often defined it as, you know, I've talked about doing the research, right, and that informing the film. That this film kind of existed in some weird realm, and that it was almost like we were excavating it more than we were creating it, because we would find things that validated our instincts in the research, and we were sort of in, you know, streamlining, siphoning something out of the you know, collective unconscious, I think, because the toe was just this idea, as I explained, as being something super, super intimate, and why I chose a toe, and the idea of the toe opening up and something coming out of it. It turns out that the toe imagery gets reflected throughout the whole film, because when you get to mystical Kabbalistic Judaism that believes in Dybbuk's, that exorcisms happen through the big toe on the left foot, and you see, you know, the boys trying to exorcise Rivka's Dybbuk out of Shmuel's body through the toe later on. But those were, you know, accidents that we owned when we learned about that synergy, you know, that he's thinking about her body, but maybe the image of the toe and the beetle crawling out of it is when her Dybbuk gets released, kind of that early on in the film.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Shawn. We have so many questions to ask, but we don't have enough time, unfortunately. So here's one last question from YouTube. A question students in the MD toward equity class had is, can one simultaneously show respect for a religion while also critiquing it, particularly if one is not critiquing as a practitioner of it?
That is a difficult question. And again, you know, I throw that answer in some ways. I will engage it tangentially as I do, but that, you know, I suppose that is audience for each audience member to find on their own. And I come back to this point that you know, the premiere of the film at Tribeca, there was a Hasidic man in payas, black coat, hat, who came up to me afterwards. And again, he had a foot out of the community because here was a Hasidic man at a screening at Tribeca. So, you know, he had his own independent streak. But he came up to me and he said, I want to thank you for this movie because I lost my mom recently, and this reminded me of the way that my dad grieved. That he would go to my dad, to my mom's grave, and the community criticized it for him. Because there's a taboo against going to a grave too often, because you're in a way deifying the dead. And that sort of eclipses, you know, you can't deify anything other than the deity, other than God. So he thanked me for it. And then there were largely, you know, there's an elderly secular reform and conservative and Orthodox and modern Orthodox audience, elderly audience in South Florida, where I'm from originally. And I thought we'd find a great home with them at the Boca Raton Jewish Film Festival. We played lots of Jewish film festivals, and some rejected us because they were from cities that were more conservative. San Francisco embraced us, but even audience members there had issues. But in South Florida, my people, you know, my community, there was this sense that they felt that the movie was wholly, entirely offensive and anti-Semitic. And again, we're talking about people who themselves aren't Hasidic Jews, who in many cases are Reform and or secular. That audience, you know, splits into lots of different viewpoints. Again, they're not a monolith, but some feel that the Hasidic community is the extreme, ultra extreme is a blight on Judaism. We are not extremists. That is extreme. And some feel that the flip side is, I am not that religious, but I'm so grateful that there's Jews that are. And we have to protect those Jews' right to be more religious than I am, because it comes from some sense of Jewish guilt. And again, everything in between, that's an oversimplification. But there are folks who saw that and again, didn't engage past, here's a Hasid and he says the F word at some point, and here's a Hasidic man and he's touching a pig. So I feel like you're making a joke. But again, even the humor in the film is Jewish. The dialectic is Jewish. The DNA of it is Jewish, but they felt that something was entirely offensive. And there are folks in the community the Hasidic community, who again, thanked me for the film. There's a young Hasidic filmmaker who's become a friend at this point, who's broken away from the community. But he reached out to me because he's trying to work in the horror genre and make Hasidic horror films right now. And he said that To Dust was one of the best representations of what he knew on film, and he was really, really grateful for it engaging in genre versus the strand of films that are more neo-realist in this realm and space. And we've had an amazing dialogue. I can't wait to see the Hasidic horror films he makes, because they're going to be more authentic than anything I pulled off. And I can't wait for that. Not just authentic in the trappings, but authentic in the lived-in soul of somebody trying to reconcile themselves from that community. So there was always the question if I had the right to tell the story, and I wanted to tell it respectfully. There's a couple of different threads and tangents here. One is that a lot of the Hasidic films that we see right now, if you look at Unorthodox, you know, and the popularity of Unorthodox on Netflix, of Disobedience, which Alessandro Nivola, our producer, in the course of To Dust, was in Disobedience as an actor. There's a fascination, and I would say a voyeuristic fascination with the Hasidic community. We sort of love it. We love watching it, and we love judging it, right? We, the collective societal we, who isn't Hasidic. But a lot, and they're very important stories that are told by people who have left that community, and those are their individual stories, right? But a lot of the narrative of the socially realist, neo-realist Hasidic films that are made pit the individual against the community. And they can be summarized often, some with more nuance than others, as this oppressive, backwards thinking community can't let the individual who wants to leave, in the case of Disobedience, the individual lesbian who wants to leave, express her full individuality, so they oppress her. So the only path to victory and a happy ending is escape. and breaking off from that community. I didn't want to tell that story, number one, as a personal perspective, and number two, I don't feel like I had the right to tell that story about the person who left. I wanted to tell a story about a person who loved the community from which he came, who hit this wall and this roadblock and this emotional hurdle of the human condition in his life, and who was going through this process of sin, as we talked about, as biblical figures do, because he wanted to return. He wanted to reconcile this divergence. I don't know if his community would smile on the way that he reconciled it or frown on it. I don't know that if when the movie ends, if he's gonna, get arrested the next day for digging up her body or permanently exiled from his community. I don't know that. The movie doesn't end there. The movie ends with a man who has found that for himself. And I was interested in the story of return. And to speak about the South Floridian Jewish audience, there was a screening down there, and I wasn't there. Jason was doing a Q&A, and he was like, thrown into the lion's den because he's not Jewish and didn't have the Jewish answers to lean back on. But he was trying to say, we had Hasidic consultants. We had one of the consultants from Disobedience on our film. And there was this, he was an antagonistic Q&A with the audience that was calling this film outright anti-Semitic. And he was trying to say about the ways that we tried to inoculate ourselves against that by having a Hasidic, multiple Hasidic advisors, including one from Disobedience. And the audience that was railing against him said, oh, collectively, he could hear it in the room, Disobedience, whisper, whisper, whisper. What a wonderful film. What an incredible film. And in many ways it is, but if you're talking about offense or the right to tell a story, and this is made by a non-Hasidic filmmaker, right? Who's making this movie and delving into this community, then like that movie is beautiful because the individual triumphs over the oppressive community, and yet that's not somehow problematic or anti-Semitic, but a Hasid with a pig is. So it is tricky, and there's a lot of thorny questions about authenticity. What I can say is that you want the right collaborators if you're going to engage that, and you want humility to take feedback from those collaborators, and humility to look back at what you've done once you've done it. And again, I say this right after being defensive about certain aspects of it, but also to listen and to engage again in conversations with why those people are challenged by this film, by any film, by any piece of art. And it's only worth what the conversation is afterwards, and the ability to have that conversation civilly and with humility. But yeah, it was very, very, very problematic. The reason why it needed to exist in the Hasidic community, again, I'm gonna go off on a tangent here. I could be here all night, is that if it was a Reform Jew who was asking this question, you started to ration it up. I knew that this was a movie off the bat that was having a conversation with religion and science and grief. If it was a Reform Jew who was asking this question, there'd be no drama or stakes. If it was a conservative Jew, no drama or stakes. If it was a modern Orthodox Jew, no drama or stakes. They're modern Orthodox scientists. It needed to be within a community that we're asking these questions was an existential threat to your belonging in that community, and where you would have had zero exposure to these questions or what the answer might have been. So it was a dramatic and emotional necessity that it was situated in that world. And by engaging it honestly, we found so many beautiful, beautiful nuances of this film, the Hasidic mystical element, the specific Hasidic practices that in and of themselves are very, very beautiful. And in the emotional desire for his family to want him to do better. They're critical of his grief, but all from a good place. They're misguided in maybe some of their interventions, but it's a community who loves him and wants him back. And hopefully, in my mind, will embrace him when he returns, if he can keep certain things secret from what he has done.
So before we end, we had this comment on YouTube from our DMD professor and distributor, Nikki Justice. And I agree. She said, Shawn, you put so much thought into every image, scene, line, character, and poignant moment in this film. Thank you for giving us a glimpse into your mind as a actor.
Thank you, Nikki. And I have to throw that back and say that Nikki worked at Good Deed Entertainment, and you guys are so, as you know, I'm sure, lucky to have her on the faculty right now. But Good Deed Entertainment was just had the most loving hands on this film. I believe it's the last time that it will ever happen in my career, and maybe the career of most filmmakers, that they believed in giving this thing a theatrical national distribution. You know, 5-year-old Shawn got to see a movie distributed in theaters. I have a manager. Now I'm just communicating with Nikki, but I'm also, you know, saying you guys made a great choice in terms of having her. I have a manager who's old school Hollywood, and he says he has never seen a distribution company engage the filmmaking team with that much love and conversation and respect for their input and viewpoint. Weekly phone calls. So thank you, Nikki, for that comment.
Yeah, and I agree with what she said. I think the film was just so fantastic. I enjoyed watching it, and I think touching on those topics of having religious conversations in a thoughtful and meaningful way is a very important thing to be having these days. So I just wanted to thank you for coming on here and having this discussion with us.
Thank you guys so much. Really, really wonderful questions and a great opportunity to engage.
Thanks so much, Shawn, for joining us.
Thank you. And it's hard, like I like hesitantly don't even want to hang up, but it's 6 o'clock. So I think we have to. I mean, Shawn, thank you so much for sharing so much about the meaning behind To Dust, the making of it, the beauty behind your creative process and your own faith. I mean, it's been such an incredibly inspirational conversation, and I'm so grateful for your time and for your authenticity and your willingness to share with all of us and our students and the community at large, both the film and, you know, here tonight. So thank you.
Thank you guys for putting together a series like this, which is, we all know, very, very essential.
We hope so. Yeah. With that in mind, perfect segue, Shawn, thank you. Everyone is invited to join us next Friday, March 12th at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, when we will welcome artist designer Heidi Bosever to present Culture Changes Us, How Stories Work on Hearts, Minds, and Bodies. Not in the same way that To Dust works on the bodies, but I think that's more conceptual there. And this will continue. We're going to continue with the Diverse Perspective series every single Friday for the rest of the spring semester. Check out our rich lineup at dmd.uconn.edu/diverse. And don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube and follow us on social media at UConnDMD to see all of the exciting content that's coming forward. Thanks to all our wizards and organizers behind the scenes, Nicole Justice, Stacey Webb, Michael Toomey's back there pasting into YouTube right now, and running our tech, our student marketing team, and everyone who worked together to produce this incredible event. And most of all, thanks to everybody out there in the virtual audience for joining us today. I hope all of you are as inspired from this talk as we are here within this Zoom room virtual environment. Together, we all get together, we can continue to inspire and mentor all of our young creatives. I know that everybody in this group has a huge commitment to that. And make films that, as Shawn, you said earlier, ask more questions than give answers. So stay safe, wear a mask, have a wonderful weekend. Bye-bye. All right, we're off. Woohoo!